my question is, is very wonderful, very well carved, and bringing out the voices, community voices. But I think how do we, in terms of dissemination, because I see it as a very good tool to bring out the community voice and at the front burner of the climate change discussion in the Ghana. But I know sometimes we do these beautiful works, and put it in the shelves, decorate it in the offices. What is the effort so far? So take it out there to those that need to be aware, sensitized with this beautiful effort. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and perhaps maybe I may want to reiterate a point that I made earlier with regard to somebody coming to see us and also making the effort to show the the documentary to the president of the country. Aside from the president, we have other people who've expressed interest, and Mark did mention in terms of organizations that have also requested it. So we believe, just saying that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a step. And so far, we spent a couple of weeks in Ghana showing it to various communities, and also we believe that that is not going to be the end. And like you rightly said, we hope that this will not be shelved, but this will just be the beginning of greater projects of this nature. Already we are planning on embarking on similar projects in Ghana because we realized that as researchers, one thing that we realize is that a lot of times we focus on writing papers, to journals and other things. And when we focus on Africa, we realize a lot of Africans do not read. I'm sorry to say that I'm an African, but I'm really sorry to say that. So we realized that using documentary really goes a long way because it's a matter of bringing people together and showing it to them. And we realize that is also an effective way of disseminating some of these research findings. So that is something that we're going to be working on.
All right. Thanks a lot for sharing those info, especially about the power of storytelling and how it reached till the president, and that's such a powerful message. And also thanks for the presentation from Nigeria. And I believe because we have run over time, we'll be moving to closing. And I call Dr. Ahmed for the closing.
Thank you so much all. Thank you for the attendance. Actually, here we are in Africa, represented by Egypt. Lucky Nigeria and Ghana, I would say, because they have representative here to show us what's happening there. But if we take the general view in Africa, we will find in Somalia, in Algeria, in Tanzania, the same problems happening. And the problem is the contribution of Africa is very few in these climate changes. The responsibility is failing on the big industrial countries that have to take their responsibilities in supporting the movement against the climate changes, because now we saw the impacts and we have to think about the reasons actually. The main reasons are the industrial development and its waste, the agricultural behavior that's unsafe for the environment, and the increase of population as well. On behalf of Haiti Cholera Research Funding Foundation, I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Terry, Dr. Magnus, and my colleague Anka, Omar Anka, and our moderator from India. Thank you so much for the attendance, and it's time to take practical steps, not only raising the awareness, but practical steps, and the great 20 countries have to take their responsibilities in this movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Check.
Oh my God. Connect. There's no connection here. What? To my laptop. Here. Oh, there is? Yes. Okay, okay. I can share, please. Thank you.
Check, check, check.
Which part? Second one? Yeah, so it's
check audio test, check mic test, check. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الو بسم الله.
test. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. test.
Check audio test, check. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Check audio test, mic test. check audio test, check. Mic test, check. Check audio test, mic test, check, check. Check audio test, mic test, test. Check audio test. خلي بالك انا مقرب من المايك برضو check audio test, mic test, check audio test, mic test. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. check audio test, mic test. check mic test, check audio test, mic test, check audio test, mic test, check audio test, mic test, check. بسم الله. check audio test, mic test. check audio test, mic test, check. حسن ممكن نشغل الانترنال سبيكر الانترنال. check audio test, mic test, check. check audio test, mic test, check. check audio test, mic test, check. mic test, check audio test, mic test. ننزل شوية. check mic test, check audio test, mic test, check. check audio test, mic test, check. check audio test, mic test. اعتقد كده كويس يا باشا. ممكن نثبت على كده. check audio test, check audio test, mic test, check. حسن ممكن نوطي الانترنال مرتين بس. internal check 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 audio test check check ما تقفلهاش خالص check audio test mic test check check audio test mic test check 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 audio test mic test check 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 audio test mic test check 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 audio test mic test check لا 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 العكس كده انت راجع على المايك check 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 audio test mic test check 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 audio test انت الصوت ايه تمام انت بقى الصوت ايه انت تمام كده بالنسبه لك تمام check
Good evening, everyone. Before I start and welcome you to this session, I've just been asked by the Secretariat to make a little announcement. The Third World Network meeting was originally scheduled to take place in this room, but instead it is taking place inside event room 8. So if you are here for that, you may want to change locations. But for everyone that is here in the room, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, representatives of parties, Indigenous peoples, constituted bodies, and non-parties who are here for this joint dialogue of the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform and the Gender Action Plan. My name is Emily Vallée-Watt, and I am a settler Canadian that is also a representative of the Government of Canada, and I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you to the Secretariat and the organizers for inviting me to moderate this important session. To start us off and set the stage for a fruitful and productive dialogue in a good way, I will now give the floor to Chai Surui, a young artist from the Paiter Surui people of the Brazilian Amazon. Chai is the founder of the Indigenous youth movement of Rondônia, which aims at engaging and strengthening Indigenous youth voices in the state of Rondônia. She is a strong voice for Indigenous climate activism and a volunteer at Engahamunda and counselor at WWF Brazil, as well as the UN Global Compact. She is also a columnist for the Brazilian newspaper Folha de São Paulo, and she will now deliver an Indigenous invocation in the language of her people. Chai, please, the floor is yours. Yes, please.
First, Kanatenga is hello and welcome. And I would like all of you to dancing and singing with me, if you can. Please.
We can dance? Dancing?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. This is a fight single from my people, because today we are here to construction together a future, and a future to everybody. I will speak in Portuguese right now, okay? Muito obrigada, primeiro, por terem se juntado a mim nessa dança e nesse canto de luta por um futuro. E luta é, sobretudo, sobre justiça para aqueles que já se foram. É, sobretudo, sobre as mulheres indígenas que perdemos e por nossa floresta que vem sendo destruída. Mas o nosso povo continua a resistir. Então, eu peço que levem essas palavras, que levem esse canto como semente, que talvez possam não alcançar, né, todos os lugares do mundo, mas que elas consigam alcançar os nossos corações. Eu queria falar aqui principalmente com vocês, mulheres, que são principalmente quem está na linha de frente dessa luta. Muito obrigada a vocês. E eu estou aqui para convidar a todos para que lutem junto das mulheres indígenas. Porque sem nós não tem futuro. O futuro é feminino. E as soluções também virão da gente. Uma vez me perguntaram, bem assim, mas por que você acha, porque no Brasil hoje a gente tem muitas mulheres, principalmente mulheres indígenas, mas, enfim, de todas as etnias, de todos os povos, nessa linha de frente de resistência. E me perguntaram, mas por que você acha que isso está acontecendo, Chay? E eu falei, isso sempre esteve acontecendo, né? O que eu vi é que diante de toda essa destruição, vi muitos homens, muitas vezes, se venderem e se acovardarem. E vi as mulheres estarem ao meu lado e à minha frente, ou na minha frente dizendo que não. E é por isso que eu venho vendo isso, porque elas sempre estiveram lá como líderes e guerreiras. Então, para que a gente consiga ter justiça climática, para que a gente consiga ter um planeta, a gente precisa falar principalmente com mulheres, não apenas sobre mulheres, mas as mulheres têm que estar aqui. E essa é a minha mensagem hoje para vocês. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Chai, for opening this joint dialogue and setting us up in a very good way. We are all here because we know that climate action is most effective when Indigenous peoples and when women and girls in all their diversity are meaningfully included in climate action and decision-making. To this end, both the Gender Action Plan and the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform's work plan are crucial to advancing the inclusiveness of the UNFCCC process. On behalf of Canada, once again, I am delighted to be moderating this joint dialogue because it is an important opportunity to explore intersecting identities and intersecting mandates with a view to bringing valuable insights to the climate decision makers and implementers. This event was designed as a dialogue, so the intention is to have a very interactive discussion on how to enhance Indigenous women's climate leadership throughout the UNFCCC process. Please feel at home and do not hesitate to raise your hand to pose questions and comments. Interpretation for this event is, or will be very soon, available from English to Arabic, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish, and you will need one of these. The event is being broadcast on the COP27 platform and on YouTube, and the audience watching us from home is invited to ask any questions or make their comments through Menti, as indicated on your screen, and I believe there is a code that is hopefully on your screen. It's not on mine at the moment. The role of Indigenous women in innovating and transmitting the knowledge necessary to cope with the effects of climate change has increasingly been recognized as crucial for the resilience of their communities. At the same time, and as acknowledged recently by the Commission on the Status of Women, the capacity of Indigenous women and girls to take action depends on removing structural barriers and strengthening Indigenous women's access to and control over land and natural resources. Furthermore, and as recognized by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, Indigenous women and girls face specific threats due to climate change. These developments in international discussions set the scene for our discussion today, which we hope will help support us in finding ways to enhance the implementation of a participatory and inclusive approach consistent with the Paris Agreement. It is my pleasure to now welcome the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, Mr. Simon Steele, to provide opening remarks for our dialogue. Mr. Steele, over to you.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, and good evening to all. So from the bottom of my heart, I want you to know how pleased I am to speak at this joint dialogue, the first of its kind. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm both not an Indigenous person and a man. I have a lot to learn from those of you in this room, and I commit to you that I will do so. Indigenous women suffer disproportionately from the direct and indirect impacts of climate change. I want to acknowledge particularly the enhanced security risks that Indigenous women face due to the increased pressures when collecting fuel, water, and food, all because of climate change. Indigenous women are leaders showing the world how to protect people and our planet. I'm committed of Indigenous women as agents of change. Indigenous women hold the power we need to help us put climate action into the hearts and minds of every person on the planet. I want to ensure that that power is not just recognized, but well and effectively used. I said in my opening speech that women and girls, in all their diversity, have to be placed at the center of climate decision-making and action. Their empowerment leads to better governance and better outcomes. For countless generations, Indigenous women have provided for their families and are often at the center of agricultural production. They're custodians of traditional agricultural knowledge and are on the front lines of climate change. They often notice subtle ecosystem changes caused by climate change before anyone else. This dialogue presents an opportunity for us to focus on transformative, regenerative, and intergenerational values and wisdom that this COP session dearly needs. I appreciate and congratulate the efforts of the local communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform for including this important topic in their work plan and welcoming the invitation for a joint dialogue in the context of our overall Gender Action Plan. Whilst we're here at the implementation COP, I've been trying to work out in each of my engagements what does implementation look like for this conversation. Humbly, I have 3 requests of those in this dialogue. The first, practices. Please tell me what you're doing and what we could be doing better. What can we be doing better? The second is results. Please tell us what results you're getting in the work that you're doing. And the third is networks. This COP forum is an opportunity to both build networks and to share information. I hope you're getting in touch with the teams that represent your countries and showing them what you're doing. Help them consult you properly. There will be people here who are responsible for pulling together national adaptation plans and other country commitments who could really use your invaluable knowledge. My message to parties is clear. I encourage all parties to make sure that their ministries responsible for issues related to gender, Indigenous issues, especially those related to women and girls, and civil society are included in planning, coordination, and implementation. I encourage parties to start building capacity within their institutions to engage and consult with local communities and Indigenous communities in an ethical and respectful way. Parties and the global community can include the knowledge and practice of Indigenous people and local communities in helping to close adaptation gaps. I fully support these efforts to ensure the voices and solutions of Indigenous women are incorporated into our processes, into our overall work to drive climate ambition as we work towards building a safer, cleaner, healthier and more equitable future for all people. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steele, for outlining what I think is a powerful vision for where we can go with this work. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Daria Yegoreva, who is a member of the Facilitative Working Group of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform. She represents Indigenous peoples from the UN Indigenous Sociocultural Region of Central and Eastern Europe, Russian Federation, Central Asia, and Transcaucasia. Daria is a director of the Center for Cultural Heritage of Indigenous Peoples of the North and works with Indigenous women in remote areas supporting social programming. She is also a member of several Indigenous peoples organizations, including the Indigenous Women's Network, the Indigenous Peoples Union of the Tomsk region, the Center for Support of Indigenous Peoples of the North, the Aborigine Forum Network, and the Indigenous Peoples Network. In her capacity as co-lead of Activity 4 of the second three-year work plan of the platform, Daria is going to briefly introduce us to this joint dialogue and outline the purpose and expected outcomes we would like to see from this event. Daria, please, over to you.
Svatielt, thank you so much, Emily. And I would like to, to welcome you all to this joint dialogue and for your interest in hearing more about the issues that women from indigenous peoples and local communities face in the context of climate change. This joint dialogue on enhancing indigenous women climate leadership in UNFCCC process has been co-organizing between the Facility Working Group of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform and the GAP. It is part of a series of joint initiatives that the Local Communities, Indigenous Peoples Platform and the GAP have been implementing together for several years now. The collaboration between two programs responds to the need to enhance the leadership role of women from indigenous peoples and local communities, building on synergetic areas of work between these two programs. As the mandates of both programs include areas of work that are relevant to address issues related to women from indigenous peoples and local communities in the context of climate change, this dialogue intends to further support that collaboration by pursuing three objectives. The first objective consists in emphasizing the central and often unnoticed climate solution led by women from indigenous peoples and local communities in terms of local resilience and climate stability. For this first objective, we have honor today of having among our participants 6 indigenous peoples, men and women, that will share their experience to highlight how day after day women from indigenous peoples and local communities are making a difference to face the challenges and seize the opportunities opened by climate change at all levels of governance. The second objective of this dialogue is to understand how to advance the leadership of women from indigenous peoples and local communities in climate policy and action. Some of the panelists will talk about the work they have been part of to elaborate climate policy and action that both recognize the contribution of women from indigenous peoples and local communities to face climate change and six means to empower them and to upscale the agency and impact women are having. Finally, the third objective of this joint dialogue is to highlight ways of enhancing the effective participation of women from indigenous peoples and local communities in international and national climate policy making and action, including through development of approaches that tackle jointly the challenges and opportunities
deriving from their gender and ethnicity. And for this last point, we are counting on you as participants from parties, indigenous peoples and local communities organizations, and constituent bodies of the UNFCCC to actively collaborate to this dialogue by sharing experience, policy resources, and skills that you find have been important to further advancing the leadership of women from indigenous peoples and local communities in the context of climate change. It is our hope that the dialogue contributes to the overall objective of the GAP and the local communities indigenous people platform program by strengthening the capacities of women from indigenous peoples and local communities to get involved in the UNFCCC process. We also expect that the exchanges we will have raise awareness of the opportunities available for the involvement of women from indigenous peoples and local communities in international and national climate policy making. Last but not least, we would like to contribute in enhancing the implementation of participatory and inclusive approach that takes into consideration vulnerable groups such as indigenous peoples and local communities, and is consistent with the Paris Agreement. I hand over the microphone back to Amy to proceed the agenda, and thank you very much for providing me such a great opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Daria. And without further ado, I will pass the floor over to Fleur Newman, who is the Action Empowerment Unit Lead and UNFCCC Gender Focal Point in the UNFCCC Secretariat. Fleur will provide an introduction to the Gender Action Plan and its relevance for Indigenous women, as well as provide an overview of the mandate of this event from the Gender Action Plan perspective. She'll also introduce possible avenues for future collaboration in the intersection of the two work plans. And as Daria noted, please prepare your questions and comments for this interactive session as you reflect on what is being said. Fleur, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I want to express also my delight to see this event become reality. It was nearly 3 years ago, well, it is 3 years ago, that the parties agreed the Enhanced Lima Work Programme on Gender and its Gender Action Plan. And included in the activities under the Gender Action Plan is this joint dialogue. So 3 years in, and it's a delight to be here in person. I thought I would start just to give a very brief and high-level overview of where gender sits within the UNFCCC process. And it's not an article under the Convention or the Paris Agreement. It is built from decisions under both the Convention and then subsequently the Paris Agreement. And we see that there was a long gap between the first decision, which was very focused on the UNFCCC process and the need to increase the representation and participation of women in that process. And 11 years later was the next standalone decision on gender, and in that it included another encouragement and urging to parties to increase the representation and participation of women, because there hadn't been a lot of progress between 2001 and 2012. And it also, very importantly, created a standing agenda item on the COP agenda. And so subsequently, there have been many more decisions which are building on the knowledge and understanding that has grown since 2012 of the importance of looking at the human aspect, the human drivers, and the human impacts of climate change. And that these are differentiated, and that the issues around gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment, and here women and girls in all of their diversity, that this is not somehow separate from what is happening with climate change, given that climate change is a symptom of systemic issues. And we have, in 2019, as I say, the enhanced Lima Work Programme on Gender and Gender Action Plan, and at this COP, there is a review, an intermediate review, because we are halfway through the Gender Action Plan. And so there is, the parties are considering the ways in which the Gender Action Plan is working and areas where it might be improved. And that is expected to be a decision under the COP at this COP. Next slide, please. So the Gender Action Plan, and I think this speaks to where this activity actually sits under the coherence there are these 5 priority areas, and these priority areas were identified as the enablers for delivering on what parties had said they wanted to do on gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment. And these were things that are anticipated to accelerate the adoption of gender-responsive and ideally transformative climate policy and action. And so these, I think, are a really useful thing to keep in mind when thinking about entry points for where the 2 work programs can come together and identify opportunities for collaboration. For instance, under the knowledge management and communication, there's lots of opportunity there for expanding both the scope within the Gender Action Plan, but also within the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform, the work program. And the piece around gender balance, participation and women's leadership is what we're talking about today, and this is where it's important to understand that women are not a homogenous group, and that this is a way in which we can demonstrate how the diversity within women's diversity is also a contributor to different perspectives. We have a problem that requires different solutions. We can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them, and the only way we change things is by bringing in different perspectives, and this is an opportunity to do that. Coherence across the UNFCCC as well as UN system in understanding what's already happening in other spaces and making sure that we're building on the work that's happening everywhere. And that includes, for instance, being able to connect to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building and the work that's happening there as well. And gender responsive implementation and means of implementation, and here really looking at the national plans on climate and the opportunity there to bring these perspectives into the work to enhance ambition and to also make the transition as just and equitable as possible. And then there's a piece on monitoring and reporting, and this obviously is important in this process because this process is founded on data, on reporting, on being able to communicate those pieces. So I'm not going to go any further into detail because I think there's a lot more that needs to be discussed tonight than this, but I hope that's given us an overview of where the 2 programs can come together. Thank you.
Thank you. That was indeed a great overview and does set us up well for the next speaker. So next I have the honor of giving the floor to my colleague and friend, Tiana Carter, who is the co-lead together with Daria of Activity 4 of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform's second work plan, to which this dialogue is part. Tiana Carter is a member of the Facilitative Working Group, where she is the party representative for the Western Europe and Others group. And she also covers the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform and the Gender Agenda for New Zealand. She is a policy officer in the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and a Maori woman, which is the Indigenous Peoples of New Zealand, from the tribes of the Ngāpuhi and the Ngāti-Watua from New Zealand. Over to you, Tiana.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you so much, Emily, for that introduction. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you, not only for moderating this dialogue, but also for all of your role in making this dialogue a reality, and your active involvement in the development of this joint dialogue as a member of the Canadian delegation and who was the representative for the WEOG on the FWG in the last cohort. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Apologies, everyone, brothers, sisters, everyone. I have the absolute honour in the last year to co-lead Activity 4 with my colleague in the FWG, Daria, and other FWG members. And we are so excited today to be part of this first ever joint dialogue between the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform and the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan, a deliverable under Activity 4. Before diving into the exchanges on the leadership of Indigenous women and women from local communities, I would like to share with you how this dialogue fits in the context of the work that is being undertaken by the LCIPP. The LCIPP was created by the Paris Agreement to strengthen the knowledge, technologies, practices and efforts of local communities and Indigenous peoples related to addressing and responding to climate change, to facilitate the exchange of experience and the sharing of best practice and lessons learned related to mitigation and adaptation in a holistic and integrated manner, and to enhance the engagement of local communities and Indigenous peoples in the UNFCCC process. The LCIPP has three functions. The first, promoting the knowledge of Indigenous peoples and local communities related to addressing and responding to climate change. The second function is related to strengthening the capacities for engagement of Indigenous peoples, local communities and parties and other relevant stakeholders to engage in climate action. Finally, the third function of the LCIPP is related to climate change policies and actions, and requests the platform to facilitate the inclusion of knowledge of Indigenous peoples and local communities in climate action, and facilitate stronger and more ambitious climate action by Indigenous peoples and local communities. These functions are reflected in the current work plan of the LCIPP, the second 3-year work plan, and this joint dialogue, the first of its kind, well, the first dialogue between the UNFCCC and the LCIPP, is part of the second function on capacities for engagement. It focuses in particular on building the capacities of Indigenous peoples and local communities to enable and empower their engagement in the UNFCCC process. As Emily mentioned, this dialogue intends to enhance the leadership of Indigenous women and women from local communities, and build both the capacity and the capacities of parties to the UNFCCC, constituted bodies and other work streams to engage Indigenous women and women from local communities. It provides a space for us all to come together an inclusive space for us all to come together, to collaborate and exchange views. We hope that this exchange and this dialogue will allow for the FWG and the LCIPP work plan to have a more informed and powerful input to its work in relation to women, Indigenous women and women from local communities, and that issues relating to Indigenous women and women from local communities permeate throughout the whole of the second three-year work plan. These exchanges also inform collaboration between the GAP and the LCIPP with a view to mainstreaming and highlighting the invaluable contribution of Indigenous women and women from local communities into gender work streams and the LCIPP work plan. It therefore does represent a really important activity for the whole of the LCIP work plan. And with this, I hand back over to Emily to proceed with the agenda of the event, and I really look forward to this exciting exchange. So thank you.
Thank you, Tiana, for setting the scene to understand how the exchanges from this joint dialogue will contribute to the work plan of the platform, and for concluding this opening of the session. So I'm very pleased to announce that we will now switch up the panelists up here. The next session will discuss climate solutions led by Indigenous women and women from local communities, and will be moderated by someone else, by Mr. Ruben Abrego, representative from Panama. So before choreographing this change of scene, let me just ask everybody to please give a warm round of applause to all of our panelists for putting this work together. Thank you. Okay, now we can switch. Oh, and also, please, panelists who are coming up now, grab your name tags as well so that people know who you are when you are speaking. Thank you.
Buenas tardes, estimados panelistas, colegas representantes de las partes, organizaciones indígenas y de comunidades locales y expertos de los órganos constituidos de la Convención Marco sobre el Cambio Climático. Le doy la más cordial bienvenida al segundo bloque de este diálogo conjunto organizado entre la Plataforma de Pueblos Indígenas y Comunidades Locales y el Plan de Acción de Género, que tiene como objetivo hacer un aporte a la Convención Marco sobre el Cambio Climático, en particular en lo que respecta a su trabajo con las mujeres indígenas y comunidades locales. Este bloque está enfocado a dar luz sobre las soluciones climáticas que día a día son encabezados por las mujeres de pueblos indígenas y de comunidades locales, quienes, por su liderazgo, llevando a cabo observaciones y conocimiento y en el cuidado de las familias y comunidades, han sabido cambiar, ajustar, potenciar e innovar en las estrategias de medio de vida para mantener las familias y comunidades unidas, resilientes y seguras en el contexto del cambio climático. El énfasis de este bloque va, por lo tanto, en el nivel local, que es en donde sucede la mayor parte de la acción climática llevada a cabo por las mujeres pertenecientes a los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Debido a la importancia crucial que el nivel local tiene para los pueblos indígenas y la comunidad local, este primer bloque de discusión está dedicado a él. El propósito de este bloque es precisamente el de escuchar algunos ejemplos emblemáticos de lo que está sucediendo en el terreno para saber cuáles son las políticas que se requieren y cuáles las herramientas de diseño de políticas que podrían potenciar y edificar sobre esas acciones que ya ocurren a nivel local y que muestran el sorprendente potencial que durante siglos las mujeres de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales han sabido construir escuchando la madre naturaleza. Tengo el día de hoy el gran placer de contar con excelentes panelistas que compartirán la experiencia que han tenido en diferentes regiones socioculturales de los pueblos indígenas. De antemano ruego la comprensión de los panelistas porque, visto el tiempo reducido que tenemos para cada intervención y debido a que la modalidad de este evento es la de un diálogo, es importante que respetemos el tiempo acordado a cada intervención, que es de 5 minutos. Mi rol como moderador es el de hacer que la agenda se cumpla en el tiempo acordado y para eso necesitaré de su cooperación. Comenzaré por dar la palabra a la señora Amy Juan de la nación Odan en Estados Unidos. La señora Juan es responsable de oficina y coordinadora de enlace comunitario del Consejo Internacional de Tratados Indios, que es una organización indígena internacional que trabaja para la soberanía libre, la libre determinación de los pueblos indígenas y la protección de los conocimientos, tierras, conocimientos, territorios culturales y derechos de los pueblos indígenas. La señora Juan compartirá con nosotros una experiencia de las mujeres indígenas de América del Norte, una región que se caracteriza por la existencia de planes de adaptación y de mitigación escritos basados sobre análisis detallado de los riesgos climáticos que los mismos pueblos han identificado. Señora Juan, tiene usted la palabra por 5 minutos, por favor.
Good evening. My name is Amy Juan. I come from the Tana O'odham Nation in southwest Arizona. Tana O'odham means desert people, and so I'm kind of happy to be here in another desert, even though it's cold in here. I was raised, just to get straight to the point, I was raised by my grandmothers. One of my grandmothers, my mother's mother, she was an herbalist, she was a medicine woman. And my other grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she was a very good cook and a community organizer and someone who always pushed me to get involved. And it is through their teachings that I am who I am today and have made a commitment to my community in all these different ways. And I think that for us women, we take that commitment in different ways, whether it's to our family, to our communities, and just for the rest of our lives when we decide that we have a path and what we're going to fight for, especially for the future. I get really emotional when I think about that, when I think about my grandmothers and all the different things that they've taught me, because they have laid a foundation in it for me and for my family, and I think that's something that's common for all of us. And I think especially what that is not just those teachings, but that love, that unconditional love that knows no time and knows no space. And even though my grandmothers are gone now, again, I think about them sitting up here and being able to speak to my community and what we are, and the work that I'm doing. Another thing that I often think about is, just other women in my community. There's a book about our people that is called Desert Indian Woman, and it was written by an anthropologist by the name of Ruth Underhill. And when she was observing our community, one thing that she observed about our singing circles is that back then in the 40s and 50s, the men would create this inner circle of singers, and then the women would sit outside of the circle of men and back up the singers. And in this book, she asks Chona, who's one of the ladies that the book is mainly about, she asks Chona, don't you feel left out? Like, don't you feel like you're treated differently because you're not sitting in the circle, you're sitting outside of the circle? And Chona just laughed and she said, no. She said, because the men have to sing for their power. Women already have it. We already have it. And we're lending our power, and we're supporting the men, and we're supporting our community in this way. So those are some things that always stick with me as a reminder to the power that we have as women. And also, I don't have children of my own. That's something that I haven't experienced yet. But I am an auntie, I am a godmother, and I am a teacher. So I have many children who call me mom or sister or auntie in all those different ways. And so all of these different things are what make me who I am and give me strength in the work that I do. And just to share what that looks like, I think especially in the past couple of years, what I'm especially proud of is bringing seeds home. Seeds that have been in seed banks for the past 30 years in deep freezers. I see these seeds, we see these seeds as living beings. They're not something to be kept in a freezer like a museum. They're not something to be kept on a shelf. They're still very much alive. And I really see these seeds and our foods being essential to the health of women and health of our community and health of the future, because everything that we're taking into our bodies is given to our children, and especially desert foods. One bean in particular is called a tepri bean, or a bao as we know it, and it's a kind of a tiny bean, but very resilient, grows with very little water, and is also a superfood. It's low in the glycemic index. It doesn't spike your blood sugar, very high in proteins and all of that good stuff. And these beans are very important to the O'odham diet. And so, to me, for our women, for our community to grow these beans and to have access to them is so important to our physical health, which contributes to our spiritual health and our mental health, because food is medicine. And so the work of bringing these seeds home from these seed banks really taught me a lot within the past 2 years. One main lesson that I learned that I didn't think about was that bringing these seeds home and reasserting and reclaiming our role as seed caretakers in my community, which is pretty much a paternal or patriarchal society community, was going to ruffle a few feathers because when I brought these seeds home, a lot of the men who are farmers got really defensive and territorial and asked me the question, well, who are you to take care of these seeds? Who are you to bring them into your care? But what I did was I went to our elders, I went to women and men elders in our community, and I asked them, what's the proper way to bring these seeds home? What kind of blessing or ceremony should we do for these seeds to bring them home? At the time that these seeds did come back to our community was also the time that a lot of children who died at boarding schools in the United States were also coming back to, or being unearthed, being discovered and coming back home to be reburied. And so I saw that as a similar effort, that we're bringing these seeds, these babies back home to our communities. And so these elders were reassuring and saying, that's also a practice that we've lost in our agriculture. I'm glad that agriculture was mentioned earlier as an important role. But the reclaiming of women's role in the caretaking of these seeds was something that surprisingly to me was
Señora
something
Loco,
that blossomed out of
ya se venció los
these
5
efforts.
minutos, por favor, para que finalice nada más.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the translation.
1 minute.
Okay. And so that's really pushed forward, just from these little seeds, literally pushed forward work that we're doing now here with the city of Tucson, which was a big push for involving indigenous people, local tribes in the creation and implementation and vision for the city of Tucson's climate action and adaptation plan and 10-year plan, especially as it concerns water for us there in the desert. And so I hope to talk more about that, but I wanted to just share, the very real story of who I am and who we are and how these traditional teachings and values have blossomed into much bigger work and vision. So thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora Ami, por esa importante experiencia y conocimiento tradicional que seguro va a aportar muchísimo a la plataforma de pueblos indígenas y hacer conexión con el plan de acción de género. A continuación tengo el honor de presentarle al señor Paul Locol, quien nos hablará del trabajo que él ha hecho con las mujeres indígenas de la comunidad de pastores nómadas Carimojón, de lo que forma parte. La experiencia de la que nos hablará el señor Locol ejemplifica la importancia de que también los hombres entienden el rol clave que las mujeres indígenas juegan en el ámbito del cambio climático y que tengan un papel proactivo para crear ambientes de reconocimiento y apoyo que permitan a sus compañeras, madres, hijas y lideresas políticas hacer más y mejor de lo que ellas ya hacen. Paul Locol vino a la COP27 desde su pequeña aldea de pastores Carimojón, la comunidad Pian, al noreste de Uganda. A lo largo de su vida, el señor Locol se dice bendecido por estar rodeado de mujeres, disfrutar de sus conocimientos y obtener aprendizajes importantes sobre el papel que ellas llevan a cabo, de apoyo a las comunidades y familias para enfrentar todo tipo de desafíos, incluidos los planteados por el cambio climático. El señor Loco es padre de 6 hermosas hijas y 2 hijos, nacidos igualmente de 2 cariñosas madres. Las mujeres también han jugado un papel clave fuera de su familia en el ambiente laboral. En su comunidad están llevando a cabo una iniciativa para observar y documentar el clima local a través del sistema de conocimiento Carimojón. En esa iniciativa, Paul trabaja con 4 miembros más de su comunidad, 2 de los cuales son mujeres. Todos los miembros se enfocan en capturar y promover el conocimiento que tienen las mujeres sobre nuestro clima. Finalmente, el señor Loco representa a los pastores indígenas en el Comité Nacional de Referencia de los Pueblos Indígenas, constituido por el Gobierno Nacional para considerar las cuestiones relativas a los pueblos indígenas en todo el aparato gubernamental. Paul también es presidente de distrito de Navilatuc en la región de Caramoja. Señor Paul, tiene el micrófono por 5 minutos.
Thank you very much, Moderator. And I want to thank Joan for the very good presentation. I find myself connecting to your community when you talk with passion about the tapra bean. Tapra bean is one of your seeds that was introduced to our community in 1993 by a certain a certain gentleman called Roland Jim. And this seed has kept on saving us every moment we have the drought. And because it takes very little time to mature, I want you to take our regards to your community that their seed has saved Karamoja from dying. Matada Adanabo, I greet you all. And as the moderator has already introduced, my name is Lochol Paul. First of all, I want to thank the United Nations Voluntary Fund for Indigenous People for giving me this opportunity to participate in the COP27. It's my first time to participate in a COP event, and I have a lot of excitement that I'm going to share with my people. I have learned a lot in terms of, I've got the experience from the stories that you have shared that relate so much to my community. I thank the fund, and I want to encourage the rest also to be able to join. I come from a pastoralist community, and like you have been told, I'm a district chairperson and working with also the 4 experts to do weather forecasting. And so I have, in my capacity as a district chairperson and working with these experts, I've got a very good opportunity to interact with women, and I'm very aware of the important role that women play in finding solutions to the impacts of climate change. Just like most pastoralists in Africa and other areas, our Karamojong people face enormous drought risks, and these risks come in form of violent conflict when there is drought, hunger, and when there is crop failure and livestock death. It manifests itself in livestock diseases and massive environmental degradation. It is important for us to note that due to climate variability in my area, adaptation is becoming very difficult. Every other day we are seeing new situations, new events manifesting, terrible events. Only last year we had more than 4 events. We had fall armyworm, we had the African armyworm attack our pasture and crops. We had livestock diseases, and coupled with the effects already of COVID and all this, and we had massive and violent conflicts happening around our community, also because there was drought which was happening in the neighborhood. So there was a struggle for resources. And when all this happened, we see negative coping strategies. We witness negative coping strategies like massive charcoal burning, heavy consumption of crude alcohol. So the solution for us lies in alertness, to be able to respond to the risks as they happen in time. And so that's why the initiative that we are carrying within our community to do weather forecasting is very essential. And women play a lot of role. Our task of the 4 plus myself whom we're working with, is just to gather information from the other community members, and also to be able to analyze and share the risks with our immediate neighbors. So I have seen women do a lot. And just to mention a few, our women, indigenous women, participate in weather forecasting. They observe many aspects. I have two mothers that I always relax to call wives, and they are a great lot. They do a lot in terms of alerting. Sometimes milk goes bad, and they are able to tell you there is going to be a disease of livestock. When milk refuses to, we put milk in a gourd. When it refuses to coagulate so that we can check and get butter, it shows that there is going to be a disease. And it's women who detect this. Even the amount of milk, because women, for us, do milking. The role of milking is for women, and so they easily report to you that there is going to be a disease when they see the amount of milk either increasing or decreasing. They observe the world, the stars, and the moon. And this is the role they do to contribute to forecasting. I hear women in our community, when they see a white moon, it symbolizes that there is not going to be rain within that month. And so you hear them alerting the community. They make noise. Every other family beats a calabash or something of that kind and announces pele pele kwang, really, and it alerts every other person. So people start to prepare for that bad event. Women also in my community trigger action. When they see that action has delayed, they do what we know as akilulukin. They make noise, they make alarm to make the community wake up to action. When men have not killed their sacrifice, because when rain disappears, men are supposed to rise up to the occasion and consult God. So when they delay to do this, women wake up and mobilize themselves. They do this that we call akilul. They go singing around the village to waken up men. The next day at daytime, they assemble themselves and move along the pathways of our villages to pray to God to give us rain. And normally God answers the prayers of our women. They participate in disaster management. Our women participate in disaster management whenever a disaster occurs, like when we have conflict. It is women who rise up to the occasion. They move, they organize a caravan and move to the community that we need to seek peace with. They present themselves and ask for forgiveness on behalf of our people when we have wronged. And so they present themselves and ask the next community if they are so much hurt that they can hurt them instead. And so they mitigate the risks of violent conflict. So our women play a lot of role. Women also have grown in a family, like I said in some session here. I have grown in a family where my mother was a leader. She was a spiritual healer. She was a medical person. And I grew knowing a mother who is a knowledge holder, whom people used to come and consult before they do anything, whom people come to collect herbal medicine from. A woman who used to talk to our plants, because for us, when you want to pick the roots from the plant, there are special people who go and get the right from the plant. They bless the plant and ask for permission to get this medicine in form of roots or leaves, and then later may be able to reward the plant for the good things they have done. This is what I grew up seeing, and my mother used to lead me. I used to carry this for her. Now, the problem is climate and environmental changes are disempowering our indigenous women to the extent that they can no longer play their roles normally. But most of the times, trying to ensure their survival and the survival of their families. Nowadays, there is less attention that our mothers, our women, put in ensuring the health of our environment. Members, my relatives, there is need to do something about this. Because our IP, women, much as all the institutions are getting disempowered, I am seeing the institutions that are led by women are disintegrating and weakening each day and quickly. And thus, it is making our women to lead, to lose leadership in addressing climate solutions. There is need, members, to support our indigenous peoples' women to sustain their role and empower them to strengthen traditional institutions that enable them to contribute to the fight against this climate change. Well, issues of drought, for example, are beyond the efforts of ordinary people to curb. Pastoralist women should be part of the processes of discussion, policy decision-making on issues of drought, conflict, anger. They must be supported.
Señor Local, one minute, please.
I want to ask that UNFCCC should ensure that financing is decentralized by all our partners, and the principle of equity is applied so that women-led initiatives access enough financing to empower them. I want also to recommend that the parties of this conference and the parties of the Paris Agreement should be monitored to ensure that they comply with recognition of the rights of indigenous people. Because until you recognize indigenous people, that's when you will recognize their knowledge, that's when you will recognize the entities there within, that's when you will recognize their women. And to enable women, there is need for us to fight for peace in a pastoralist environment so that women can get a meaningful, an environment where they can meaningfully engage. And also, there are a lot of initiatives that are being done by our women in terms of ensuring environmental health. They recycle a lot of materials. They do plastics, which normally harm our environment. They transform them into beads. And they do a lot of craft work. And I think there is need to support these enterprises so that we can keep our motherhood and our environment safe. So because of time, I beg to Henia Alakaranoway. Thank you for listening.
Disculpe. Muchas gracias, señor Loco, por compartir con nosotros ese ejemplo que nos habla de la importancia de que los hombres indígenas y no indígenas, de comunidades locales o no comunidades locales, nos unamos activamente en esta tarea decisiva para apoyar los esfuerzos, la sabiduría y la agencia de que las mujeres indígenas y de comunidades locales han sabido dar prueba durante siglos. Ahora toca el turno a la señora Archana Soren, joven indígena de la tribu Cadia de Odisha, India. Ella es miembro del grupo asesor de la juventud sobre el cambio climático del Secretariado General de la ONU y del grupo de trabajo de solidaridad indígena de Yongo, el grupo oficial de niños y jóvenes de la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre el cambio climático. También es miembro de la Junta Directiva de Derecho de la Tierra. Tiene 5 minutos, señora Archana, por favor, si podemos pues, cumplir con el tiempo estimado, se lo agradecería. Adelante.
Johar everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, and I would like to also give my regards to all my friends and colleagues, indigenous youth, those who are not here for several reasons and had unable to access the spaces. I'm so proud of you all and lots of love. We are talking about solutions and indigenous women. I would like to start by saying that we indigenous women and indigenous young girls and young people are the solutions. We indigenous women and young people are not here because what we merely do, but who we are as a person in terms of our worldview, in terms of our way of living, and in terms of our governance systems. And it's really critical that when we talk about climate solution, it's not only focused on what indigenous people are doing, because at times it often leads to be very extractive, rather than acknowledging what indigenous people, who indigenous people are, what is their worldview, how they are contributing towards climate action, biodiversity conservation, and most importantly, what is their relationship with nature. I have said this often, but I would like to reiterate that for us indigenous people, we are not mere part of nature, we are nature. For us, nature is a source of identity, culture, tradition, and language. Unlike other communities who see nature as a commercial commodities. And it's really critical that when we are talking about climate solutions led by indigenous women, it often comes down to, are indigenous people safe? Are indigenous women safe on ground? And I would like to emphasize that indigenous women have been contributing immensely towards climate action. But it's also their life is under danger, they are living under threat because of eviction, migration, displacement, and even their safety is at threat. Indigenous women are constantly under the threat in terms of extractive developmental projects. And these eviction also leads to a lot of challenges in terms of their safety. Like I'll give citing an example of a situation that indigenous communities and indigenous women were living in peace, taking their work or working in terms of their daily livelihood, agriculture, and contributing towards climate action. But then we have extractive developmental projects in their areas. Then we have inflow of outsider communities in their areas. There is sexual assault with the indigenous communities. There is restriction to the freedom to go out from the territories. And this is all is very important when we are talking about climate action, because safe and enabling environment and conditions are priority and very critical for indigenous women's participation and indigenous women's contribution towards climate action. I would like to say when we talk about solution, I would like to first emphasize on indigenous communities and indigenous women in my region have been engaging in forest-based livelihood. Forest-based livelihood is a major source of income and is a major source of livelihood. The income which we get from forest-based produce is also the major source of income for education of our children. And I think it's really critical to see how forest-based livelihood at this point of time are being impacted by impacts of climate crisis. Last 2 years, we have been facing COVID. We have been facing impacts of climate crisis simultaneously. And this is something which needs to be considered when we are talking about gender action plan, when we are talking about indigenous women, because this situation can come in the future also in terms of different circumstances. Because when we had COVID, because of the lockdown, the indigenous people were unable to sell their produce and there was loss of their entire livelihood sources. Then we have impacts of climate crisis, cyclones, rains in an unwanted time, and then the entire forest produce gets destroyed. And this happening in a vicious circle every year is pushing indigenous women to the brink of debt. And this is really critical. And when we are talking about indigenous women, I would also like to emphasize on loss and damage. When we are talking about loss and damage, often we only see the loss or the damage which is quantifiable or which is seen by people. Like for example, if there is a flood in the region, then we witness it that how communities have lost their life, they lost their shelter. But same mere drop of rain in a central area, in the forested area, which affects the forest-based livelihood, which affects the forest produce, entirely disrupts the livelihood practices of indigenous communities and indigenous women. But there is no documentation of this. There is no acknowledgement about these laws and these damages. And that is what is really critical, when it is really important to see a holistic dimension of loss and damages. Loss done by the floods, but loss done also by the mere drop of rains, which consistently then pushes the indigenous people, forces them to migrate, forces them to displacement. And when we have impacts of climate crisis, the burden of climate crisis mostly falls on indigenous women, because when the livelihood, which is the forest-based livelihood, their agriculture is destroyed, the men of the communities go to get livelihood by migrating and taking up other jobs like laborers and others, but it's the women who is taking care of the forest, it's the women which is taking care of the community and the children and making sure that she's taking off the family with the livelihood resources. And I think it's too much burden on women, but there is no acknowledgement and recognition towards the contribution of women, and it is really, really critical. Coming down, I would like to emphasize that when we are talking about women's solution, I feel our grandparents, our mothers, our indigenous leaders have so much of traditional knowledge, but it is again in our traditional knowledge in the form of our traditional language. We are witnessing the loss of language, which is because of a lot of imposition of developmental worldview. And I would just like to sing a song, and I would like to explain the meaning of the song. So this is the first song which I learned from my grandmother, and the song is this song is all about a leafy vegetable, and it's like the small children are going to collect that leafy vegetables. They're going and plucking the leaf and then breaking the stem. I was like, oh, this is a really beautiful song. But now when I'm in this discourse of climate action, I realize that tomorrow maybe we do not get this leafy vegetable. Tomorrow, maybe my ancestor, my upcoming generation do not know that we can eat this vegetable because of this imposition of developmental worldview. And that's where I realize how important and critical these songs and documentation of our histories and cultures in our folklores are. So I'll just sing a line which is like, Konan konan kuru ki odal sa kamte mai ighai sundar re odal sa kamte mai ighai sundar sa damte kamte mai dudu damte phekaite mai ighai sundar. So this is a Khadiya song of my tribe. Well, coming down to solutions, I again want to emphasize that we indigenous women are the solution. We indigenous youth, girls are the solution. And when we talk about solution, I think it's really important for our representation and participation in the decision-making processes. Being part as a member of UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, I have realized and witnessed that no one else can speak for us on our issue like we do. And that's why it's really, really critical for indigenous women to be part of this decision-making processes. And we need to stop tokenizing indigenous women and indigenous people also, because we need diverse perspective of indigenous people and indigenous youth in the decision-making processes. And that's where I feel the Gender Action Plan plays a huge role, taking into consideration that the participation needs to be across level. And at the end, I would like to say that we may make a really strong policy at COP27, but nothing goes on ground if it's not implemented on national level. So I would like to recommend and push that we have stronger implementation mechanisms and structures so that whatever laws and policies and whatever discussions we are having here together, it's also implemented really well on ground. And at the end, with a short example, I would like to emphasize the importance of free, prior, and informed consent. I am also a researcher, and I had gone to an indigenous leader and his community for a visit. And when I said, how is everything, how are you all, he said, like, people had come for plantation and we are protesting. So I was like, what plants did they bring? Why are you protesting? So they said they had brought mango trees and jackfruit trees. And we didn't want that to be planted in our region, and that's why we are protesting. And I was like, okay, but what's the problem with mango trees and jackfruit trees? And then the indigenous leaders said that if they planted mango trees and jackfruit trees in the periphery of the village, then the wild animals and the wild boars will come to eat it, and they will destroy their agriculture like lands and crops, and that will lead to wildlife and human conflict. And I was like taken aback, because even if I am indigenous, I did not knew these nuances on ground, which makes me realize that it's so crucial to have free, prior and informed consent of indigenous people and local communities, because they know the best for their own region. And that's why the indigenous leader said that we need sal trees, because it is important for our livelihood and it is important for our significance in a spiritual level also. And that's where I realized that our policies are often top-down approach. It needs to be bottom-up approach, taking into consideration indigenous people with different diverse perspective. And I just want to end by saying this, that we indigenous people, local communities, young people, women should be leaders of climate action, not victims of climate policies. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora Archana, por compartir su idea con nosotros, que nos permite pues entender que la experiencia en realidad no es una cuestión de acumular tiempo y situaciones, sino que en realidad se trata de poder involucrarse y aprender de la situación, y que por lo tanto los jóvenes también tienen experiencias muy valiosas de lo que todos podemos aprender. Ahora, con estos elementos, pues paso la palabra para el señor Jaime Ovia, quien va a comentar los ejemplos discutidos a partir de su perspectiva como miembro del grupo de expertos de países menos adelantados. Señor Ovia, por favor, tiene usted el micrófono.
Thank you, Moderator, for giving me the time to express some of the views from the LEG, or the Least Developed Countries Expert Group. Good evening, everyone, and Talofa. My name is Jamie Ovia, and I'm a LEG member, but more importantly, I'm an Indigenous and a Pacific Islander from the country of Tuvalu. On behalf of the LEG, I wish to express our appreciation for this opportunity to provide our reflections on considering and promoting the engagement of Indigenous people in our work. Our primary function is to support the least developed countries to address climate change with a primary focus on adaptation as a key priority for these countries. The process to formulate and implement national adaptation plans, which is the main vehicle for adaptation planning and implementation, is guided by the use of Indigenous and traditional knowledge, gender sensitivity, and other important provisions. Over the years, since 2001, the LEG has been promoting these important aspects by factoring in these technical guidelines, engaging appropriate experts, drawing upon LDCs, experience mobilizing support for LDCs, catalyzing implementation, and promoting best practices and lessons learned. We continue to build on our experience and look forward to continuing to work with different actors to create necessary bridges and enhance support to the LDCs, all with the view to achieve successful adaptation. Indeed, women have a vast knowledge and experience in managing natural resources as water, forest, and land, especially what my colleagues have been saying. And they have a deep understanding of the environment, often are the majority of workers in these climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. Indigenous women particularly play a key role in the transmission and preservation of their cultural practices and customs, acting as custodians of ancestral knowledge They are the front line defending their lands, territories, indigenous rights, and advocating for indigenous practices in responding to the climate crisis. Their nature-focused knowledge ensures their communities into a climate-resilient future and to contribute to the biodiversity preservation and sustainable development globally. I'm happy to share a few concrete examples from the LDCs on indigenous women's considerations in their NAPs. The first one is from Burkina Faso's NAP, which presents a project to develop adaptation technologies which take account of the conditions faced by women's associations on the basis of traditional knowledge. The second one with a strong focus, on indigenous people. Throughout the NAP, Chad has also appointed the president of the Association of Pure Women and Indigenous People, human rights and climate activist Hindo Umaro as the Goodwill Ambassador to the presidency of the Republic, aiming to facilitate the inclusion of indigenous people in their national adaptation efforts. And even the third one is, and an even more famous example is the NAP from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which focuses on indigenous women by including a risk and vulnerability analysis of climate change impacts in this group and a preparation of a plan to build the resilience of indigenous women to the effects of climate change in the DRC. In the process to develop the NAP. Although relevant, way more can be done to enhance the leadership of indigenous women in adaptation planning and implementation processes. There are many venues in which the LEG can promote this important topic in this work with the collaboration from the LCIPP as well as the GAP, and we will be glad to share these moving forward. There are many examples of indigenous women implementing climate solutions. We can see international organizations such as the World Bank showcasing stories of indigenous women taking leadership to address the impacts of climate change from Northern Korea, the Philippines, to the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua. The LEG wants to see more of these stories and tell those stories from LDCs. We look forward to receiving from this discussion relevant insights on how the LEG is in collaboration with the LCIPP as well as the GAP can develop strategies to support LDCs to enhance the participation and leadership of indigenous women in adaptation planning and implementation. Thank you all for listening.
Gracias, señor Obia, por su comentario. Muy importante. Bueno, ahora pasamos, estamos contra el tiempo, para la sección de preguntas y respuestas. Para ella, pues, su intervención es muy rápido, por favor. Si hay algunos comentarios, preguntas, aportes. Tenemos una mano por allá. Adelante.
Thank you so much, co-facilitator. I just wanted to thank you all for your contributions. In particular, Amy, your talk about the Indigenous woman in your family and your grandmothers and your mothers was just resonated very deeply with me. And just thank you all for your contributions, and Achana, what you were talking about in terms of the examples of those and the importance of those localized, specific and contextual solutions is really important. So thank you all.
Muchas gracias. ¿Tenemos otra participante? Adelante.
Muchas gracias. Tengo una consulta sobre el tema del sexto estudio que se hizo del IPCC sobre género y cambio climático. Quisiera saber en este estudio lo que yo vi o lo que sentí fue que mayormente se promovió el rol de las mujeres y especialmente las mujeres indígenas más como víctimas de cambio climático, y realmente aprecio estas palabras que nos dan ustedes los facilitadores de cómo no somos simplemente víctimas, pero también agentes de cambio. Entonces mi pregunta para los panelistas es, desde su comunidad, ¿cómo es que podemos todos empezar a apoyar y cuál es su esperanza para que tienen esta COP en temas de género? Gracias.
Muchas gracias. No sé cuál de las panelistas quieren responder la pregunta, por favor, rapidito.
I think one simple way, which was a very beautiful example, and thank you for sharing that, is sharing seeds, sharing food, and continuing to do that. It made me cry to know that our beans help your community in that way, and that means a lot, because that's what it's all about, is helping each other to survive, especially in looking at communities who are going to be or who are experiencing desertification, and how important desert people's knowledge and foods that can grow on very little water are essential to helping each other. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
I think addressing to this question, I would also like to say that reclaiming spaces in the decision-making spaces or in this entire discourse of climate action is also something which I see as a solution, because often women, indigenous women and indigenous youth have not been able to access these spaces. And specifically, it's also like when we are talking about solution and like as Kantuta said about gender studies and climate action, I think one of the key challenges which women are facing is also access to finance. And we, a global network of women, have worked on a call to action saying that climate finance should not leave behind indigenous, Afro-descendants and local communities, women and girls. This is in line to the $1.7 billion US, which was committed in COP26 in terms of rights of indigenous people and local communities. So I really propose the Gender Action Team and Gender Action Plan and local communities and indigenous peoples platform also to emphasize that how we can make sure that all the commitments and pledges which is made in different COPs or different decision-making spaces are also being incorporated in all these policies, which is again reaffirming to this, because I think one of the major question comes when we are talking about climate finance is access of finance by indigenous women, Afro-descendants, local communities, women and girls. And I think that's really critical, because often we see there is a lot of finance flowing on, but on ground we are not being able to access it. And indigenous women have been protecting the forest, patrolling the forest, specifically when it is in terms of forest fires or in terms of day-to-day basis. But it also comes down to what are indigenous women getting out of it. It's merely because of the relationship, their belief system and their worldview that they have, this relationship with nature, which we have this relationship with nature. They are protecting it, they are safeguarding it, and they are defending it. The least and the bare minimum which we can do for them is recognize their rights over the land, forest and territories. And this I would again like to emphasize that definitely we need to have community recognition of land rights, forest rights and territorial rights, but also we need to emphasize that how we are able to have women rights amongst these. And at the end, I would like to emphasize that when we are talking about climate solutions led by women, it comes down to safeguarding women environmental defenders and land defenders.
Thank you. Again, I think just to reiterate, I have seen with the interaction that I have had with with my local community, sharing knowledge is very important. And I want to really say, if we have to succeed strongly, the LCIP should enable participation of women. It should create spaces where women share their experiences and knowledge at community level, at national level, and at international level. So that creates confidence. That also gives women the opportunity to share freely. Somebody said the other day, can we give the opportunity? It was from the youth. The youth said they need their own separate opportunity to interact just alone. And for me, I think for pastoralist women, from my community perspective, they're always timid to share when they are mixed with others. Can we have them engage in their own space so that they are able to now express their knowledge, they are able to gain more confidence. I saw in this group that I'm telling you that I am leading, I brought them 2 times with the links project again that I said, the UNESCO links. We interacted with professors only 2 times, and now people gain confidence. They want to go everywhere and preach about the knowledge. But at first there was timidity. So can we expose our women? Can we allow them to participate in a free space where they are not coerced, where they find themselves actually free to share their ideas? Thank you.
Sí, vamos, repito que todavía tenemos agenda que desarrollar. Adelante.
¿Es correcto? Sí? Okay, gracias. Hi, Emily from Canada. I just wanted to thank you all for your contributions. It's really valuable to hear from your experiences, and I just wanted to reflect. I heard 2 things. One, the call that Indigenous peoples and Indigenous women and youth in particular are the solution, and 2, the importance of knowledge exchange like we're doing right now, and partnership. So in that spirit, I just wanted to share that Canada has developed what is called the Indigenous Peoples Partnering for Climate Initiative, which was designed in discussion with Indigenous peoples in Canada, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And it is a climate finance initiative that promotes collaboration between Indigenous peoples from the global north and Indigenous peoples from the global south. And we're hoping that that can indeed help or be one source of knowledge exchange and work together for climate action. Canada is also a really strong supporter of the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform as another forum for exchange that we are all familiar with here. And then the second thing, reflecting just on solutions, if I may just plug that Canada's Pavilion, which we are having for the first time at COP27, at least in anyone's memory, is interpreting Solutions Day. November 17th was designated Solutions Day by the Egyptian presidency, and at the Canada Pavilion, we're interpreting that as Indigenous Climate Leadership Day. And so please do come by. We have free coffee and a full program of Indigenous climate leadership events that was, again, developed with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and should be very interesting. So I hope to see some of you there. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Bueno, vamos a finalizar este bloque de panel. Le agradecemos mucho a los 3, 4 panelistas que estuvieron con nosotros, dando aportes importantes para el desarrollo de la plataforma y del plan de acción de género, y por la participación de ustedes también, por estar acompañándonos en este momento. Muchísimas gracias a todos, un aplauso para todos.
we would like to invite the next two panel members to please go in front, and we will combine the two discussions in the next segment. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for still staying with us at this time of the night, and for our presenters and our guests. We have a bit of a dilemma, and we would like to inform you that while we are all here and we have our interpreters need to leave in a few minutes. So we would like to find out if we would explore a bit of a change, since we all know that women are very empowered. Our adaptive capacities will now be tested, ladies and gentlemen. So we have two proposals for the panel members. We can continue tonight, but we will be very, very, very short in our discussions, and we might miss out the dialogue itself. Or we can pause here, and we will announce another schedule tomorrow to discuss the second and the last two panel discussions, and we will devote the rest of the night to engaging directly, networking, and enjoying some refreshments which were prepared for us. So in the spirit of inclusivity, and I would like to ask if, what would you prefer? We can really change the approach, and we can focus on specific interventions, but very short, or we can pause here, continue the discussions tomorrow, and spend the rest of the night engaging directly, not from the stage, but engaging together with our participants. My panel members are smiling. What do you think will be the answer?
I just suggest that can we do a kind of voting for number one, then vote two for both? We are very participative here. We would vote to make choice in the name of everyone on the floor.
Right, so let us do it this way. If your answer is one, we continue, but in a very shortened approach. Can you please stand up? Continue. Okay. If your answer is two, you want to pause now. We continue the discussions tomorrow, but we will find time to network and engage with refreshments. Can you please stand up? All right. Your voices are heard, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for your flexibility, dear panel members. We will announce the schedule for the last two panel discussions for tomorrow. In the meantime, can you please give a round of applause to everyone for your participation? And we invite you all to please join us in the refreshments outside. And please take this time to really engage and really learn about the approaches and the strengths and opportunities that women, gender, and girls can contribute in the process and in scaling up climate action. You will hear from us soon, and thank you very much, and I wish you all a very pleasant good evening. Thank you.
Wakakazana mwendo, wakasema vijana, njoni tulijenge kwa mavumbi na jasho, hawakujali mateso, walichoweza ni kesho. Yes, sisi watoto, nchi yangu ni urithi wangu, zawadi ya pekee nitaitunza.
Nchi yangu ni urithi wangu, zawadi ya pekee nitaitunza. Nchi yangu ni urithi wangu, zawadi ya pekee nitaitunza. Nchi yangu ni uhai wangu, zawadi ya pekee nitaijenga. Wakaja vijana